From the nation's capital, SwissAmerica.com presents Secure Freedom Radio. Now, here's your host, Frank Gaffney.
Welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. This is your host, indeed, Frank Gaffney. I'm the president of the Center for Security Policy, which is proud to sponsor this show. Our program is designed to be an owner's manual for your most important possession, your freedom. Every weekday evening, Secure Freedom Radio will provide you with access to the very best minds working to keep you free and secure. Our guests and regular contributors will include past and present government officials, lawmakers, military personnel, experts, journalists, commentators, and freedom fighters from here and abroad. In addition, Secure Freedom Radio will feature regular segments with ordinary Americans doing what we as a people have done in every generation: find innovative ways to secure our homeland from threats, foreign and domestic. You can count on Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney to keep you informed about those threats. We will tell you what people like you can do to help defeat them, and we will work to inspire you to become engaged, however you choose to do so. After all, the survival of American democracy in an increasingly dangerous world depends on an informed electorate. With your help and that of Secure Freedom Radio, we can ensure that our children and our grandchildren inherit all the freedoms and opportunities that have made this country the place we love, the place Ronald Reagan called a shining city on a hill. One of the most serious threats to our national security at the moment comes from the Islamic Republic of Iran. For years, various Iranian leaders have declared their unwavering hostility to the United States. Death to America has been a familiar refrain since 1979, when so-called students stormed our embassy in Tehran. Iranian operatives and their terrorist proxies like Hezbollah have implemented that slogan from time to time with murderous effects on American servicemen and women, diplomats, and even civilians. Worse yet, Iranian leaders have expressed the desire for, quote, a world without America, unquote. Some, like President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, have said this goal is, quote, not only desirable, but achievable, unquote. Some observers sense that he and his administration have, as a practical matter, accepted that Iran will get the bomb and are just trying to find an accommodation with the mullahs. Events of the past week, however, have called all this into question. Large numbers of Iranians used the occasion of presidential elections to demonstrate their vehement opposition to the regime in Tehran. The government appears to have engaged in massive fraud to give Ahmadinejad an undeserved victory over another, putatively more moderate candidate, Mir Hossein Mousavi. Violence has erupted in the aftermath of the vote as outraged Mousavi supporters were brutally suppressed by goon squads mobilized by the mullahs. The upshot of all this should be clear. The Obama administration cannot now engage with the regime without legitimating it and alienating the people of Iran that loathe the mullahcracy. A recent poll suggests that even before the vote, President Obama's willingness to appease the mullahs had actually diminished America's standing with the Iranian public. If we want Iran to stop being an ever greater threat and instead to begin playing a genuinely constructive role with respect to our interests and those of our regional allies, President Obama needs to change course. Our greatest hope lies with empowering the people of Iran, not those who misrule them and threaten us. We'll be talking about Iran throughout the hour with three of the most astute observers of international affairs of our time, and particularly their specialists on the Middle East. Senator Rick Santorum, a former two-term Republican senator from Pennsylvania, in that capacity he played a key role in trying to head off the Iranian nuclear program. He'll be talking to us about what he calls the gathering storm. We'll then have a special report on what has been billed as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's response to President Obama's Cairo speech. We'll hear from Secure Freedom Radio's Mideast correspondent and Jerusalem Post columnist Carolyn Glick. Finally, we will catch up with Fox News strategic analyst, New York Post columnist, and retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. He'll tell us about what he calls, quote, our broken world. As ever, we want your inputs here at Secure Freedom Radio. If you have questions or comments about our show, send us an email at radio@securefreedom.org or get in touch with me, Frank Gaffney, through Facebook or Twitter. Our website is also www.securefreedomradio.org. Right after this, we'll be back with our first guest, Senator Rick Santorum, on the Gathering Storm. Stay tuned for more of Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.
You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio. Now more from Frank Gaffney.
Welcome back. We're going to be talking with one of my favorite people, former senator from the great state, the Commonwealth, I should say, of Pennsylvania, Rick Santorum, now a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Rick is also a frequent contributor on television and radio in various capacities, sometimes a guest, sometimes a host, I'm delighted to say. And he's joining us today to talk a little bit about the Gathering Storm, very pointed and I think appropriate reference to Churchill's depiction of the era in the 1930s when we witnessed, as we are today, developments of great moment around the world. Developments that suggest a grave new danger emerging probably on several quarters. We're going to talk about them a bit with Rick today. Welcome, Senator Santorum. Thank you for joining us on Secure Freedom Radio.
Thank you. First off, it is great to have you on the radio. I'm so pleased that you've got a show and you're out there communicating to the public about the importance of this issue. And there's no one who does it better than you, Frank, so it's a pleasure to be on your show.
Well, I'm very grateful to you for saying that, and I hope that everyone listening will think it's true, Senator. But,
it is true.
From your lips to God's ears. Listen, this is a mutual admiration society, and I want to spend our time not talking about what great guys we are, but talking about what a grave problem we're confronting, particularly in Iran. We're as you know, looking now through a glass somewhat darkly, I guess you might say, at these elections that have taken place there. Let's just play a quick clip from President Obama, who has characterized them as very much a glass half full kind of circumstance.
Whoever ends up winning the election in Iran, the fact that there's been a robust debate hopefully will help advance our ability to engage them in new ways.
Now let's hear what Rick Santorum thinks about that.
That is either a naivete that is stunning, or a gross, deliberate mischaracterization of what's actually going on there for the benefit of the public that he wants to continue to dupe. That somehow or another talking to these people will benefit the security of our country. In either event, it's outrageous. It's an outrageous comment. There is no debate in Iran. Iran doesn't permit the mullahs, the ayatollahs do not permit discourse and debate. What this is a rigged game. You have to get approval from the ayatollahs to be on the ballot. You are on the ballot because you are going to accomplish some end that the ayatollahs want to accomplish. In the case of Mousavi, you have a man who I suspect, I could be wrong, but I suspect he was someone who was in the government before and someone who's aligned philosophically with the mullahs, even though he's considered a reformer. Reformers, it's a very narrow band of reformers and hardliners. They're not much difference between the two.
Especially if they're going to be approved by the mullahs.
Approved by the same people.
Yeah.
So it's a tonal difference. And what we saw from this election is that the mullahs who fixed the election basically said that we like having a hardline, Holocaust-denying, anti-Israel, wipe them off the face of the earth, in your face. We will not negotiate under any circumstances our nuclear program.
World without America.
Right. Well, calling names not just to the prior president, but to this president too. I mean, this man is as hostile a figure as you can possibly imagine.
This Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
Right. And yet in the face of a world community that sees him as a bit of a fool and certainly a bit of a tyrant. The mullahs lined up and said, we're going to give him, let's say, 62% of the vote.
Pick a number.
Yeah, just pick a number.
An impressive outcome.
62 is not Stalinesque 99, and it's not a narrow victory at 51.
Or Saddam Hussein's 100%.
Or Saddam Hussein's 100%. It's
reasonable.
It looks credible, but at the same time, it's incredible.
Landslide.
Yeah, landslide, absolutely.
But it's incredible. Why?
Well, it's incredible that you. Well, I'm going to talk. It's incredible that, number one, it's a fixed election. Number two, it's incredible that you have an administration who looks at this and then makes some determination that this is a regime that you can negotiate with.
Yeah. Now, Rick Santorum, currently with the Ethics and Public Policy Center, when you were in the United States Senate, which you were for 2 terms following a considerably successful career in the House of Representatives, you authored the Iran Freedom Support Act.
Right.
And I think that was a landmark piece of legislation, not as fully implemented as any of us would like. But contrast what you were trying to bring about through that act with what we're seeing playing out on the streets of Tehran today. Clearly, sentiment of the public very strongly being expressed in favor of not just this character Mousavi, but freedom as opposed to just one other form of tyranny.
We've always known that the Iranian people are not not fans of this of the malocracy. They're not fans of the current regime, and that in fact the Iranian people have historically over the past 10 years anyway have felt very close to the United States, in part because we've had an administration the last 8 years who rightly called their government, which tortures them and suppresses them, as evil. Call them what they were. And so when you they identified with the American people in that they were sort of on their side.
Right.
Now we have a president,
and hence we were wildly popular with the Iranian people, as
Absolutely.
I understand.
President Bush was hugely popular.
Right.
Now you have President Obama, who comes in and says, we can talk to these people. We can work with them. They're not so bad. And but what you've done is you've obviously undercut the potential chance for a resolution to this problem without military means. Look, there's only 4 things we can do, and one of them I tried to do with the Iran Freedom Support Act. There's only really 4 things you can do. You can try economic sanctions to try to topple this regime and weaken it to the point where it can't be effective or that you can get rid of it. So that's one thing you can do. And we've tried sanctions. Sanctions have worked to some degree. One of the reasons you're seeing the riots in the streets, if you will, is because inflation is high, economic growth is slow, unemployment is high, in large part because of the sanctions we've imposed. So we've done some good things with sanctions, but we've gotten about as far as we can. The second thing we can
Let me just remind our listeners, this is Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney. You're listening to Senator Rick Santorum dissecting the results of this Iranian election and discussing the options that we have. The first is sanctions. Second one?
Second one, is military action. I mean, we have a government that wants to obtain nuclear weapons. They've been very clear about what they would like to do with those nuclear weapons, which is to dominate the region and potentially take out the state of Israel and who knows who else in the region. So we could
or beyond, Senator.
Or beyond. That's right. We could partner with the Israelis who want to take out their nuclear facilities. I think it's very clear. Netanyahu has made no bones about the fact that he doesn't want them to develop a nuclear weapon and that they will not. And so we could partner with the Israelis to do that. That's the second option. The third option is we can negotiate with them. We can approach them and say, look, really you don't need these nuclear weapons. You know, we're okay with nuclear power, but not nuclear weapons, and talk them out of, you know, taking a position where they feel more secure and having this weapon to protect themselves and to use it as a threat to their neighbors to get what they want from their neighbors. But somehow or another, the Messiah, Barack Obama will somehow convince them.
He'll succeed where successive efforts with both U.S. and European interlocutors have failed.
Europeans have been trying this for decades.
Right.
The prior administration, contrary to what I wanted to do, because remember, that when I first put the Iran Freedom and Support Act on the floor, the prior administration, President Bush, opposed me because they thought they could work and talk to the Iranians. Subsequently, they figured out they couldn't, and they ended up agreeing with the bill and signing it. But we can try negotiations, but we've tried them. They have failed, and the government has been crystal clear in Iran that they have no interest in talking to us about any of the things that we care about.
Right. And in fact, Senator, as you well know, what we've been told by not only the Iranians, but by the Europeans who've been negotiating with them, what we're doing is we're buying time for this effort to build the bomb. They're not going to be talked out of to come, as I say, to fruition. So what's the fourth option?
The fourth option, which is the viable option, in my opinion, and which is before us as we speak, is a political option, which is to foment a revolution and have people within the country, and hopefully with some helping from outside. That don't get many people. This government, you don't get many opportunities for political dissent in Iran. It doesn't happen every day. It's happening today.
Right.
And there's two questions. Number one, what have we done as the United States government to lay the groundwork in Iran and outside of Iran, so that if a spark were to fly, that it would catch fire and result in a revolution? And the answer is we've done nothing.
Right. To the contrary, I think what despite your efforts, we've done worse than nothing. We've actually been refusing to do the sorts of things your act called for, as I understand it.
Absolutely, and we have said that we don't want to antagonize, or we don't want to jeopardize the dissenters by working with them.
Right.
We've given all sorts of excuses out there of why we don't do what we did in the Soviet Union, which was to broadcast into these areas. And the Farsi radio is a joke going into Iran today.
What else would you do, Senator, and have you tried to have our government do?
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of things we can do. There are labor unions, believe it or not, in Iran who do not like the way things are run. We could be working with labor unions. We could be working with college dissidents. We could be working with a whole host of people. We could be working with folks on the outside, groups that want to see a change, who are expatriates, who would like to get involved. We are doing none of that. Secondly, what we could do right now is Obama could give some words of encouragement to the dissidents, instead of saying, well, maybe we can work with these guys. Maybe this discourse that's occurred, will result in us being able to negotiate with the new government.
Right.
That is just saying, look, we're behind the government. Don't do anything because we're not going to be with you, which is the wrong message.
Right. Senator Rick Santorum of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, you have been an exponent of freedom, not just there. I want to just very quickly, and unfortunately we're going to do very little justice to this very important topic, so I hope you will come back soon to Secure Freedom Radio and talk with us more about it. But another place where freedom is clearly in jeopardy is in our own hemisphere. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing the Iranians, who we've just been talking about, among others, the Chinese, the Russians, Hezbollah, Hamas, joining forces with their friend Hugo Chavez of Venezuela. Can you just give our Secure Freedom Radio listening audience a minute's burst, a data dump, as they call it, on what is of concern to you about what Chavez and his friends are doing in our hemisphere? Well,
Hugo Chavez has been very, very clear that he wants to, control the hemisphere. He believes that he can work with the radical Islamists around the world who are against the United States, and join forces with them and other socialist regimes around the world, and isolate the United States, topple the United States economically, build up forces here in this area of the world, whether it's in Nicaragua or in Ecuador or in Cuba or other places, and create what the Soviets were never able to do, create a threat within our hemisphere, a launching point within our hemisphere to be able to reach the United States, whether it's through terrorist attacks or other types of incidents. This is what the plan is. He's been very, very clear about that, and he's got willing participants in that plan. We choose to ignore him and treat him as a buffoon. He may be a buffoon, but he's a very dangerous one.
Well, we're not about to let that happen here at Secure Freedom Radio. Senator Rick Santorum, a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, a distinguished legislator in both the Senate and the House. We're delighted to have you with us. I understand people can learn more about your work at www.EPC, that is E, Echo, Peter, Paul, Charlie.org. And they can also link to us here at securefreedomradio.org for more about Rick Santorum. Thank you so much, Senator, for helping us kick off this first show of Secure Freedom Radio, and we'll look forward to having you back as a frequent contributor.
It's an honor to be on your initial show. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Rick. Stay tuned. We're going to be right back with a fantastically interesting report from the Middle East by Carolyn Glick, our Middle East correspondent. Secure Freedom Radio comes back right after this.
Keeping you informed on the national security matters that keep you safe. You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio. You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio. Now more from Frank Gaffney.
Welcome back to Secure Freedom Radio. We are going to feature, at the moment, our special report. Carolyn Glick, the very prominent and very accomplished columnist for the Jerusalem Post and senior fellow for Middle Eastern Affairs at the Center for Security Policy, is going to serve as a Middle East correspondent for Secure Freedom Radio, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have her with us. She formerly served as an assistant foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu back in 1997 and 1998. And during her service as a captain in the Israel Defense Forces, Carolyn Glick served as a coordinator of negotiations with the Palestine Liberation Organization. Her first report for us today addresses Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech on Sunday and what it is likely to mean for both Israel and, in the face of President Obama's relentless pressure for territorial and other concessions upon the Jewish state, what it's likely to mean for us. Carolyn Glick, over to you.
Thanks so much, Frank. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech on Sunday night regarding the Palestinian conflict with Israel was a very welcome contribution to an otherwise largely irrelevant and unconstructive discourse on the subject. The reason that the current discourse has become irrelevant and unconstructive is because it's based upon a false assertion that it is the absence of a Palestinian state that causes the conflict to be prolonged in the Middle East, when in fact, as Netanyahu pointed out on Sunday night in his speech, the reason that the Middle East conflict has been so enduring is because both the Palestinians and the greater Arab world refuse to acknowledge the right of the Jewish people to sovereignty in its homeland. And this was an extremely important contribution to the discourse on the Middle East and on the Palestinian conflict with Israel, because by pointing out the true source of the conflict, Netanyahu was able to begin a discussion about ways that might actually be adopted to advance the cause of peace in the Middle East, specifically by placing the burden of change not on Israel, which has always accepted peace with its Arab neighbors, but on the Arabs themselves to accept Israel's right to exist in whatever borders in its historic homeland in Israel. So in that sense, his speech was extremely important. It was also important because it served as a response to President Obama's speech in Cairo on June 4th, in which the president falsely asserted that the reason that Israel exists is because of the Holocaust, the genocide of European Jewry in Europe 60 years ago. Netanyahu pointed out in his speech that the Holocaust would never have happened if there had been a Jewish state at the time. Jews would have been able to escape and find refuge in their country, and therefore the Germans would not have been able to kill them. And by making this point, he was also able to show the importance of Israel today for the Jewish people. Moreover, Netanyahu pointed out that not only did the Holocaust have nothing to do with the establishment of the Jewish state, but that by placing the emphasis on the Holocaust, President Obama ignored the basic connection and the true source of Israel's connection to the Jewish people, which is the 3,500-year history of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, a longer history than any people on earth has had with their homeland except for the Chinese. And this was extremely important because what Obama's speech in Cairo served to do was advance the false Arab narrative that Israel is somehow an interloper in the Middle East and an Arab Middle East and has no right to exist except in the minds of guilt-stricken Europeans who feel bad about having sent Jews to the gas chamber 60 years ago. There were only two problems, as far as I could tell, with Netanyahu's speech. The first one was that by asserting that Israel's support for a Palestinian state is conditional on security guarantees from the United States that such a Palestinian state will not be militarized, Netanyahu assumed good faith in American foreign policy towards Israel, specifically regarding the United States' willingness to ensure that a Palestinian state will not threaten Israel. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that the United States right now is training a Palestinian army in the West Bank and has been telling Israel that it cannot defeat the Hamas-dominated, militarized de facto Palestinian state in Gaza, and this is a problem. And the last problem is that by trying to appease the White House, by accepting Palestinian statehood, Netanyahu made it very difficult for Israel now to reject the false notion that Palestinian statehood is necessary to end the conflict and strike out a new position, a new Israeli strategy for stabilizing the situation in a way that will better secure Israel's national interests. But all in all, if we look at where Israel was before Netanyahu made this speech in terms of the intellectual discourse on its plight and where it is afterwards, it's very clear that his speech was an important contribution to the debate about the Middle East.
That was Carolyn Glick, the columnist for the Jerusalem Post, senior Middle East fellow for the Center for Security Policy in Washington, providing her first commentary for Securefreedom Radio with Frank Gaffney, and I'm delighted that she will be a continuing and I hope regular prominent feature of our broadcasts as her insights into what is going on both in Israel and in the Middle East more generally, and indeed her strategic vision is an extraordinary asset for all of us, and I believe that by making it available regularly to you, our Secure Freedom Radio listening audience, you too will benefit from her insights and her counsel. I'm delighted now to welcome to our microphones a man that you have seen on television, perhaps you've read in the New York Post, or his many books on subjects touching on all aspects of national security. Ralph Peters. He is indeed a military analyst for Fox News. He is a columnist for the New York Post. Few retired military officers have his following or his clout, for that matter. And as a result, we are absolutely thrilled to have him joining us for our maiden voyage of Secure Freedom Radio. Welcome, Ralph. Glad to have you.
Great to speak to you, and I'm honored to participate in this maiden voyage. I can't wait to meet the maidens.
Well, hey, this is not the Vestal Virgins or, the 72 after you get killed and all that. But let's start with something easy, Ralph. Obama's foreign policy.
Yes.
How would you describe its fundamentals and its prospects?
Well, I think we have our first third world president.
Wow.
It's clear that, to me at least, that Obama's foreign policy views are shaped by his personal demons, his personal experience. I mean, here is somebody who grew part of his youth was spent in the third world. His mother was clearly loony left, and that's putting it kindly. He had shifting males in the parental role in his family, Kenya, Indonesia, and it would take a mind of steel to have not imbibed anti-imperialist, anti-American third world views about how things work or fail to work. And then after that...
And who's responsible for them not working, namely us.
Right. And then as an adult, of course, he sits for 2 decades in the Reverend Wright's Church in Chicago. His friends are Bill Ayers and other extreme leftists.
Rashid Khalidi.
Right. And again, he would have to be impermeable to not have imbibed, at least at the subconscious level, some of those views. So I think this is a president who, while certainly a calculating narcissistic individual, also truly believes that many of the world's problems are America's fault. Now, certainly, we've made mistakes. Only God is perfect. But his Cairo speech, which to me was counterproductive, as we're already seeing in Iran, to say the least, was really representative of his views. When he talked about America, he talked about Thomas Jefferson's Quran, or the lash of the whip in slavery, but nothing about the positive aspects, nothing certainly about how we've defended Muslims from the Balkans through the Middle East, liberated them from Saddam. He didn't even miss the opportunity, because he couldn't bear to give Bush credit for anything, to speak about the catastrophic strategic defeat Al-Qaeda suffered in Iraq when millions of Sunni Muslims rejected them.
Right.
So all this
Ralph
was
Peters,
left out.
That's a segue that I want to make, because we're going to have to disappear for a second or two. Let me ask you, when we come back, to develop that point a little further. You've done brilliant analysis of the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. I want you, when we return, to make book on how we're likely to see Barack Obama manage those 2 fronts in the war for the free world. You're staying, I hope, with Secure Freedom Radio. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio. Now more from Frank Gaffney.
Welcome back to Secure Freedom Radio with our guest, author, star of television, and New York Post columnist Ralph Peters. Before the break, Ralph, we were talking a little bit about Iraq, and I just wanted to play a clip of President Obama talking about Afghanistan, and then ask you to ruminate about both of these 2 theaters and whether what Mr. Obama is saying about Afghanistan is not equally true of Iraq. Let's go.
The world cannot afford the price that will come due if Afghanistan slides back into chaos or al-Qaeda operates unchecked. We have a shared responsibility to act, not because we seek to project power for its own sake, but because our own peace and security depends on it.
Now, Ralph, you've written extensively, you've visited, you've brought back to the home front important insights about these fronts, as I say, in the war. I think it's best described as the war for the free world. What is it about Iraq that makes what President Obama, we heard just say about Afghanistan, less true? What is it that we can apparently regard as a matter of no particular concern, that there seems to be some sliding back into chaos taking place as American forces are withdrawn from the cities and ultimately from the country itself?
Well, Frank, I think the president has got it exactly wrong. As many Americans do, we've so politicized this issue of, Iraq's the bad war because it was Bush's war, but, the left, of course, needed a good war to prove they were macho and on security, so Afghanistan became the good war by default. But in fact, I like to say, our efforts in Afghanistan amount to sending the fire brigade to put out the outhouse between 2 blazing strategic mansions, Iran and Pakistan.
Right.
Frankly, Afghanistan just doesn't matter. It's just dirt. It's worthless dirt. Now, we don't want it to turn into a terrorist motel again, which is what it was, a cheap terrorist motel that wasn't particular about identification. But the real issues are elsewhere. Now, Iraq, whether or not people believe we should have gone there in the first place, you have to recognize 2 things. It is the emotional heart of the Arab world.
Right.
Baghdad, Harun al-Rashid, Shahrazad, it's, Bosphorus, the home port of Sinbad the Sailor. It resonates powerfully. Afghanistan resonates with nobody. It's history's black hole. They're Islam's Beverly Hillbillies, and except without the money. And so nobody looks at Afghanistan for an example. Positive change, however imperfect, in Iraq resounds throughout the Muslim world. Positive change in Afghanistan, even if we were able to achieve it, which is doubtful, because our efforts are still dwarfed by the Soviet efforts at reforming Afghanistan. They spent far more blood, treasure, money, time, and you see where they got.
Right.
But anyway, I think it's tough for Obama because he's said for so long that everything's about Afghanistan that he's trapped himself into Afghanistan the way LBJ trapped himself into Vietnam.
Yeah, but that worries me in a way less than the fact that he's trapped not only himself but all of us into a policy approach that essentially abandons Iraq. And I couldn't agree more with you, Ralph, about your characterization. And you didn't even get to the point about the fact that it's sitting on all that oil and therefore has this incredible target quality to it for its neighbors and for others, both Al-Qaeda and the various factions within Iraq, who are unquestionably going to seek to establish themselves as the potentates once we're gone. But this is the thing that I mean, I think your insight is so correct here that we're being deflected onto an issue of lesser concern. But let me ask you a question. Even if the president were serious about Afghanistan, what are we to make of the statement by Secretary of Defense Gates? Now, it's been a while, so maybe this has been overtaken by events in Pakistan, among other places. But shortly after the Swat Valley deal was cut between the Taliban and Pakistan's government, Bob Gates told a NATO ministerial meeting that he would be happy to have a similar kind of arrangement, a Sharia-compliant government in Afghanistan. Can you imagine that motel, as you call it, turning out right under that kind of management?
Well, actually, you do have to pause to ask yourself what Afghans want, which was something we don't want to do.
Right.
We always assume that everybody wants the same things we do, whereas people who are glad to see their sons become suicide bombers or stone their daughters to death for flirting with a boy, the wrong boy, I mean, they don't want exactly the same things as we do. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm not for a total withdrawal from Afghanistan, but it was a special operations war in 2001. It's a special operations war now. Our focus should be exclusively on killing our enemies, Al-Qaeda and the hardest core members of the Taliban who support Al-Qaeda. And instead of trying to turn Afghanistan into Nebraska, we should flip it and really.
That's pretty hard on Nebraska.
Yeah, well, I mean, Nebraska with the mountains, but the Taliban's goal is to keep Afghanistan ungovernable for us and the Karzai government. Our goal, in my view, and it will be much, much cheaper and easier, is simply to keep it ungovernable for the Taliban. We are not obliged to rebuild every country from which an attack upon us originates. And so I go back to the point that Iraq matters. Afghanistan really doesn't, as long as it doesn't become another terrorist mothership, and that we could do. But you have 25 to 30 million Afghans who live, many of whom live in a pre-medieval lifestyle, and quite like it, by the way, and really don't want us telling them how they should live. And next door, you've got 170 to 180 million largely anti-American Pakistanis, made anti-American by two-faced Pakistani politicians for the last 40 to 50 years.
Right.
On the other side, to the west, you've got Iran, impending nukes plus oil, etc. And so, to me, Afghanistan is just sucking the energy out of us. But you remember how LBJ said, he wanted to nail the coonskin to the wall in Vietnam? Well, I'm afraid that Afghanistan is becoming associated with Obama's vanity, that he can't say, let's take another look at this. And as far as Bob Gates goes...
This is hubris.
Yeah. And Bob Gates, Secretary of Defense Gates, I think he is the model of a public servant, a brilliant man. Again, nobody's perfect, but my God, he's done so much at defense that I'm ready to declare him at this point our greatest Secretary of Defense ever. But I also think one of the several reasons the Obama administration kept him on, in addition to covering its flank, was to have a fall guy ready.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm afraid you're right. Listen, Ralph Peters, before we get off onto our next topic, let me just ask, how can people learn more about what Ralph Peters thinks and is saying about this world we're in?
Well, obviously I'd like everybody to read my books. The last one was called Looking for Trouble, Adventures in a Broken World, and had a long chapter on my experiences in Pakistan back in the 90s when you could see much of this coming.
Right.
And, of course, the New York Post columns, nypost.com. You can get sort of serious essays through the websites for Joint Forces Quarterly. But really, Frank, what I ought to do is push some books by other people. To understand Pakistan, there's a terrific book by a very brave and talented young man, Nicholas Schmidl, on Pakistan, and it's called To Live or to Perish Forever. He took his young wife on a 2-year honeymoon in Pakistan, spent time among the Taliban, among the extremists, was on both sides of the Red Mosque standoff in Islamabad. It's well written, it's fun to read, it's not too long, and To Live or to Perish Forever by Nick Schmidl, I really think it's a terrific
Wonderful.
book.
We'll make sure that link and yours are on our securefreedomradio.org website. Ralph, let me segue to a related subject. We were talking about the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and the like. Give us your take on Guantanamo Bay and what I would argue is another example of the president's vanity or hubris or third world attachments trumping sensible policy. We're now seeing people sort of released from it piecemeal to Bermuda, to Palau, to Saudi Arabia. What should the president be doing in this department?
Well, the Guantanamo circus would be a laugh a minute if it wasn't so serious.
Right.
I mean, first of all, in my very serious view, the first mistake with Guantanamo was that we brought so many terrorists there. Terrorists should be killed on the battlefield unless we have reason to believe they're of great intelligence value. Mm-hmm. Terrorists, as far as I'm concerned, don't have human rights. When you commit an act of terror against innocent people, you put yourself outside of humanity. Well, that's my view. But Guantanamo, we insisted on, we didn't know how to treat them. Was it going to be a criminal matter, military? There was great indecisiveness, confusion. And then, of course, the international media just turned Guantanamo, which was a very humane prison where the prisoners, the terrorists, were treated better than inmates in U.S. federal penitentiaries. I mean, these guys had special food, special rights, special reading materials. I mean,
their Koran handled with white gloves.
And it wasn't exactly, the North Pole down there either. So they were treated pretty well. But, of course, it became the new Auschwitz.
Gulag.
So,
right.
Of course, Obama announces, without knowing any of the details or thinking through the legal ramifications, that, by God, he's going to change it to please MoveOn.org and the Daily Cause. And so during the campaign, he said, oh, yeah, everybody, all the Europeans, of course, all the Democratic constituencies in the states, everybody's behind Obama. Well, and then he gets to the Oval Office, and he's going to change it. And guess what? Nobody really wants those prisoners.
Right.
Nobody knows what to do with them.
Not as easy as it looked from the campaign trail, that's for sure.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi has yet to volunteer to accept Guantanamo inmates in San Francisco.
Right. No going to Alcatraz.
Yeah, and then the stunt he pulled was sending some to Bermuda and not informing the Brits. That plays into another important subject. Perhaps we can talk about it another time, Frank, is that Obama really doesn't like Europeans. He has a chip on his shoulder against the Europeans, especially the Brits.
Especially the Brits, right.
That's going to really, really hurt us.
Right.
And we all remember how Bush Cheney were taken to task for destroying our relationships with Europe because they had trouble with France and Germany, who were making enormous profits from Saddam. The rest of Europe was pretty much behind us, although Spain later flips after their own terrorist incidents. But right now, our relations with Europe, despite efforts to put a good face on it, are much worse than they were in the second 4 years of the last Bush administration. And so,
yeah, you've written an absolutely superb column on this, Ralph,
so,
about the sort of buyer's remorse that the Europeans are now having.
Yeah, I mean, I want to see the results. And what's Obama doing for us? He went to the Saudis, who to me are our true enemies. His
bowed to the king.
Yep, his
accepted their honor.
Yep, his Cairo speech backfired in Iran, as we're seeing right now. That's so much for the Cairo effect. Relationships with Europe are a mess. North Korea is just I like to say they're nuke mooning him. He doesn't know what to do. Hillary Clinton. The one thing Obama did.
We're going to have to cut you short, Ralph,
Sure.
for this litany could go on, and I hope you will come back and explore it with us further. Ralph Peters,
I'd love to, Frank.
It's great to have you with us. It's Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney, maiden voyage. Thanks for joining us. Come back tomorrow, same time, same station.
From the nation's capital, SwissAmerica.com has presented Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.